Hello, everyone. This is Henny Espinosa with Just Wish Foundation. So, Friendship Bench is a nonprofit group from Zimbabwe that has taken a unique approach to addressing mental health. So, joining us to talk about it is Zico Tiga, the group's development manager leading the fundraising team. Thanks for joining us on Just Wish Foundation, Zico.
Thank you so much, Henny, for the time and platform. I really appreciate it.
Of course, of course. So, Zico, 2 decades ago, Zimbabwe had an extreme shortage of mental health professionals. In fact, there were only 15 psychiatrists in a country of 16 million people. Now, tell us how one of the psychiatrists, Dr. Dixon Chibanda, lost a young patient to suicide and how this pushed him to really focus on a career that provides mental health care for those who need it most. But they can't afford it. They're facing geographical as well as cultural barriers.
Sure. Thank you so much for that question, Henny. And it's such a great start to the Friendship Bench story. And this sets context of the necessity of the program itself, particularly in our context. And yes, Dr. Chibanda, I mean, the statistics that you share are current statistics. At the time, Dr. Dixon Chibanda was one of 3 psychiatrists in Zimbabwe working at the main hospital in Harare. And this was a commute of the patients that you are talking about. This was a commute of a few hours to see Dr. Chibanda. So after the patient missed one of her checkups, and Dr. Chibanda followed up with the mother to find out, what had happened. Why did they miss the appointment? The mother unfortunately broke the news that the patient had committed suicide. She had taken her own life. And inquiring what had, gone between them and coming to see him, it was money. So they couldn't afford to come to Harare to commute. So essentially that meant that, lack of, mental health support in their communities robbed Dr. Chibanda's patient of recovery. The distance robbed Dr. Chibanda's patient of a potential recovery. Just $10 stood between Dr. Chibanda's patient and a potential recovery. So Dr. Dixon Chibanda then started exploring ways to take evidence-based mental health services to make them as affordable to the ordinary citizens. And grandmothers were already a source of comfort for Dr. Chibanda, mourning his patient, that he started working with the community grandmothers, training them in the basics of cognitive behavioral therapy, which we'll speak more about in the interview. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, Zico, about how culturally grandmothers are regarded in Zimbabwean culture.
Okay, so I continue to to always share that for our programming, context is key, right? And I think that's one of the things that Dr. Dixon Chibanda understood right from the beginning. I don't want to speak on behalf of the whole African continent, but what I would say confidently is that as an indigenous founded organization within the African context, tapping into the indigenous knowledge systems of our culture is key to creating sustainable solution for mental health services, right? So we're tapping into the already existing knowledges, indigenous knowledge, to provide mental health services for the communities around us. And who has better proximity and that kind of knowledge and culture than a community grandmother? So these are, custodians of culture, knowledge, and wisdom. They are already revered in their communities. They are already present, and they are already volunteers. And from a health personnel perspective, Henny, they are likely to not relocate, right? So they are not likely to go anywhere. They are trusted and dependable within their communities. They are available and able to practice deep empathy. You know that our grandmothers, our parents have lived long enough to connect the dots, right? And really problem solve together with us, and tapping into real deep empathy and able to hold space for vulnerability for the community. So grandmothers were well positioned to do this work.
Yeah. And they have lived life. We look up to them for guidance and for wisdom. they're just comforting, grandmothers are just comforting in general. So at what point when Dr. Shibanda was looking into the recruitment and training of mental health practitioners, at what point did he realize that there was already this group of experienced, empathetic, and respected caregivers who were already ready and willing to help? And they're, of course, the grandmothers. How did
Okay.
he realize this?
Okay.
Such
So
an
I will start.
interesting, it's such an interesting concept when I first heard about it, but it just makes so much sense. It just, they're already there, and it's a resource that up to that point was like largely untapped, right? How did he realize that?
So I will start by defining this idea of task shifting, which is very helpful in understanding why grandmothers were a particularly interesting or well-positioned group, to be able to do this. You use the word experience, empathetic, and respected caregivers. So the idea of task shifting is a concept where, particularly, I think, particularly in lower income countries, we have become very innovative, particularly when we're in low resource settings, right? Where, we're looking at the health force or the health sector, the health workforce looks at distributing some of the services offered at primary healthcare facility. So when I say primary healthcare facility, I mean the clinics, right? The local community rural clinics. How do we identify some of the services and redistribute them to less skilled members of the community? So instead of the primary healthcare facility being burdened by doing every single task that is related to health interventions, how can we task shift and move some of these services or some of these services to where you can say unskilled people. So instead of a nurse doing everything, a nurse can task shift some of the activities to a community grandmothers. So community grandmothers that Friendship Bench are working with, or Dr. Shibanda started training in that time, were already volunteers within their communities who were taking on some of the task shifting activities. Like, when the clinics were doing vaccination drive or information sensitization on health-seeking behavior within the community, or assisting with immunization drives for children, or in all of that, work around healthcare. The community grandmothers were already involved and volunteers, so they had better proximity to the community, they had better accessibility, and just well positioned to be able to do this work. So Dr. Shibanda started training the grandmothers on on cognitive behavioral therapy, particularly on problem-solving therapy. Took them through a few weeks of training, and allocate them a park bench, and sit at a community or a primary healthcare facility in a discrete place, to offer counseling or therapy, to community members. So you can already see why grandmothers were well positioned to do this work.
Was there also a strategy in terms of, like, a patient, instead of going to the clinics and hospitals, they get their therapy on a park bench with a grandmother? Did that also do something for the patient? Was that also a strategy to get the patient to really open up or get the treatment that they need?
Absolutely. So, as I was saying, and I think maybe there at the core of our program is the idea of creating safe space, is the idea of people sharing their story, right? So a primary healthcare facility that is already burdened by so many other health challenges. Imagine sitting in a long queue, right? When people are coming with different things, and your turn comes, and you sit in front of a nurse, and having to be vulnerable to talk about the deepest challenges of your life, right? In an open space that might not necessarily be a cubicle, but really an open space. So really the idea of setting up this park bench was to create a safe space, right? You're sitting right next, so it's not like an office where the nurse is across from you. You're really sitting side to side with a grandmother, right? And an invitation to share your story. It's not an invitation to like unburden your problems, but really I'm here for me to hear, tell me the story, right? Because our lives and our challenges are made up of our lived experience and stories. So
Yeah.
the park bench is really a space to be able to open up and be vulnerable, have a grandmother sitting right next to you in a discreet place and share your story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zika, initially this program was going to be called Mental Health Bench, right? But the grandmothers, they wanted it to be called Friendship Bench. Now, why is that?
So yeah, I mean, I continue to reiterate the idea of context, right? And real deep, meaningful collaboration with the owners of the program and the people who are going to benefit and the people who are going to dispense the program, right? So within this concept, so Dr. Shibanda, Dixon Shibanda did a randomized control trial as well, like a scientific randomized control trial, that has been published in a journal of medicine. And I think while ideating on what this idea could look like, the name came from the grandmothers themselves, as you're talking about. And the name is anchored in so many values that are upheld by the grandmothers themselves, right? How do you even define mental health within communities, especially at that time? Mental health, right now, we are so privileged that the actual language of the term mental health, people are now aware about it, right? But at that time, almost 2 decades ago, that language was not familiar within the communities that Dr. Chibanda was intervening. And what are the what ideas are we bringing along when we invite people to sit on a bench? It's just thinking about it from an visceral emotional place. What does it mean for a potential client to be invited to a bench? Do you want to be invited to a mental health bench or a friendship bench? What makes this bench idea safe or familiar if it really called the mental health bench? So those are kind of the part of the conversations that were happening around, what kind of a name, what kind of a space are we inviting people to? And I talk about values, and the idea of the name Friendship Bench is anchored in the values of empathy, connectedness, safety of friendship, vulnerability. And we know what friendship feels like. I'll end there.
Yeah, that's great. And also, Zico, the grandmothers also avoided using a lot of clinical language, right? And they focused instead on the use of local idioms. Now, why is this so important in their interactions with their clients along the lines of creating that safe space, that feeling of there's friendship, and that they are really safe to open up? So why is that important? Using focusing on the local idioms instead of clinical language?
Yeah, you have, set good context by talking about, this idea of you want to create a safe space for people to open up. But also we are touching on on this thing of stigma, right? There is deep stigma in the community. So, and there have been so many terms and, words that have been used around, mental health and mental illness, that being able to name appropriately what Friendship Bench was bringing to the community was very important, right? So, a lot of the words that were in the initial, kind of thinking around what this means and what people were bringing, what this program was offering to people, changed to suit the local language. There are two majority language spoken in Zimbabwe, Shona and Ndebele. So in Shona, the idea of depression, was translated to kufungisisa, because we didn't even have the actual word that would directly translate from depression to a Shona word. So the most relatable concept was kufungisisa, which is thinking too much, and we know what the consequence of thinking too much would mean, right? And our intervention was around opening one's mind, which is, which are the steps of problem-solving therapy, opening one's mind, which is kuvura pfungwa. We want to open your mind to start thinking differently. Kusimudzira, which means to uplift, right? And then kusimbisa, which means to strengthen. So already those ideas anchored the program, and already people can relate. They can connect to that kind of language, and it destigmatizes the intervention itself.
Wow. Tell us also, Zico, how these interactions became reciprocal. Tell us how the program has also helped the grandmothers.
Sure. So, you asked that question, and it makes me think about a project that we recently did. We partnered with an organization called Human Aspect. It's a concept where a Human Aspect project where they do storytelling. It's a storytelling project where people are, recorded sharing their lived experiences to inspire healing around the world, right? So we are able to listen to these videos from a lived experience perspective of the person being interviewed to trigger our own healing, right? And one of our grandmothers was filmed and highlighted so beautifully in ways that I had not thought about what this program meant for her. And while the program itself is giving to the community, the program gives back, as you're saying. The same skills that the program that the grandmother is sharing with the client, right, around PST, around behavior activation, around activity scheduling, she continues to use those skills for herself and her own community, right, who are not necessarily coming into the bench, subtly influencing her family, influencing her own community. And how life-giving this, this grandmother was sharing, how life-giving this is for her to walk within a community and seeing firsthand what the program is doing for her own community. And one of them was sharing, like, in my old age, I didn't think people would see my true value, but witnessing the reverence that people have for her in her community and the number of people that she's able to see and seeing in real time, people's lives changing and seeing, okay, this is the value that I bring to my community. So we are cognizant of the grandmother's mental health as well. So we have interventions that are available for them to receive counseling through our open line. Yeah.
Wow. That's great. That's great. So now, Zico, there are now close to, 100 peer-reviewed studies on the various aspects of Friendship Bench, including, of course, its effectiveness. Now, tell us how the Friendship Bench has tackled mental health across Zimbabwe, how this movement, this organization has grown through the years and its impact on the community.
Sure. I think I go back to the idea of task shifting as well. Around, to date, Friendship Bench has trained 2,000 community grandmothers.
Wow.
On PST, right? So while a decade ago or 2 decades ago, we didn't have a community grandmothers who were doing this particular work, right? This work in particular. So all this was sitting on the primary health facility or the clinic itself to intervene. Now we have technically added, or quote unquote, added 2,000 personnel to respond to mental health challenges, and people who are trained on a scientific method that is tested, that is evidence-based, that is accessible, that is community-based, right? And to date, Teddy, 300,000 people have sat on the bench with the grandmother.
Wow.
Since we started training grandmothers, over 300,000 people have sat on the bench, right?
Wow.
So you can imagine the impact of this work and what it could potentially do, right?
Wow.
Our CEO and founder, Dr. Shibanda, is always talking about this kind of revolution and idea of imagine if everybody in the world had somebody that they could turn to, right? Because this is the big idea, right? Having literally somebody that they could turn to within their reach, who is accessible to respond to a mental health challenge. And I think this is the start of that revolution.
So let's talk about that, the revolution and how it also has inspired similar programs, right, in other parts of the world. I mean, imagine that. So tell us how other parts of the world have tried to copy this. Have there been efforts to copy this program?
Yeah, absolutely. We have been very, very lucky that we receive a lot of requests globally around people asking, how can we replicate this idea within our context? And for us, right from the get-go, when the request started coming in, context is key, right? So right to date, I can start with the end. To date, our model has been replicated in 6 countries across regions, right? So in Africa, the model has been replicated in Zanzibar, it has been replicated in Kenya, in Malawi, it has been replicated in Vietnam, in Jordan, in the US, right?
Wow.
In New York. Yeah, so it has been replicated, and most of these projects start as pilot projects to test the idea within their context. And we continue to receive similar requests across the globe. We are at the moment refining that idea of how do we take this thing globally without losing its essence, because it's not necessarily in every context that a grandmother would work, right?
Yeah.
So maybe in some areas, if you are having a particular intervention for young people, we can train young people to intervene for young people. So we've replicated in so many places, but our starting point is always a theory of change, where we are trying to imagine, what does this program look like within your context?
That's right. That's right. So tell us about the future plans, what's in store for the Friendship Bench, and how can the community help?
So we would definitely, I would start with how can the community help. I mean, I've shared a lot about our work to plug in to help us continue to take the Friendship Bench across Zimbabwe, particularly, and globally. You know, we would love for people to come on board, talk about the Friendship Bench, right? Invite us to talk about the Friendship Bench, send the message, invite us to, you know, if you want to replicate the model within your community and within your space, we're happy to do that. But also, we've got a platform that people can give. It's called Just Giving. So it's justgiving.com, and people can go onto the platform and search for Friendship Bench and donate to the Friendship to Friendship Bench. And, you know, towards getting a new bench. You know, we want to ensure dignified allowances for our grandmother for doing this work. So contribution towards that, and the general, you know, intervention and taking this work to more than 300,000 people. We are continuing to do this work through working with other NGOs in Zimbabwe who want to replicate the model, through others who want to replicate the model globally. So that is, we've got our eye on taking out the Friendship Bench as far and wide as possible, so that every individual, I mean, our vision is to have a Friendship Bench within walking distance for all.
Wow.
That is the aim, to have a Friendship Bench within walking distance for all. So people can get in touch with us to, you know, replicate the model, to talk about Friendship Bench, to invite us to talk about Friendship Bench, but to also give on our Just Giving platform. Thank you.
Wow. And for us at Just Wish Foundation, Zico, we want to do our part. We can certainly feel the passion to help in the community. I mean, you guys are thousands of miles away, but we could feel it. You know, we understand the impact that you guys have had in the community, and we're just honored that, you know, we have this opportunity to get to know you guys. And we want to do our part as well by sending out a monetary donation. And we want to keep talking about this revolution that you're talking about. And we want to just wish you guys well. We know you're doing good in various communities, and you're right. Let's try to reach that goal of having a bench walking distance, and you know, and ultimately really help address the mental health crisis, you know, wherever that may be, and of course with the help of our grandmothers. Thank you so much, Zico, for joining us. Super appreciate you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed the conversation as well.
Me too. And of course, more power to the Friendship Bench. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Just Wish Foundation, for your donation. We really appreciate it as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Zico.